Oops. Okay. It unmuted me and then I muted myself again. And so someday I will learn how to use this technology. I don't know. It, I don't know what, and I don't know what's going on because when I'm checked, oh, there it goes. Okay. For some weird reason, I didn't play all the intro. That's weird. Okay. Anyway,
Huh.
never mind. So it's going now. It wasn't going for a minute there, but now it's going. Anyway, so everybody, hello, welcome back to With He Calls Deep. I'm taking a hiatus from taking a hiatus to do some fun stuff. I got bored, and so I'm like, I need to do some channel stuff because this is kind of one of my fun outlets. And so since we're in the thick of thesis writing, which is about to get more fun because I'm done with the boring technical chapter of all the background work.
Fun.
So,
you keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means.
It didn't yet, but now we're into the fun part and the fun material. So I am starting to enjoy it a lot more. At least it doesn't feel like going to the dentist trying to write this thing at this point anymore. Anyway, so I'm back from taking a break because I needed something fun to do, and this is fun for me. So, and my good friend Spencer is here with me. We are pulling out another episode of How to Read the Hard Parts of the Bible. This one's fun because we've been talking about this since we were hanging out on Joshua Sherman's back porch back at the end of July, and we started cooking this one up way back then, and it's just kind of been sitting there simmering. And it just it seems like a good time.
I think it has thoroughly reduced at this point.
Right. So, Spencer, why don't you introduce yourself real quick for anybody who might be new and doesn't know who you are, and then we'll dive right in.
Sure. All right. So, my name is Spencer Owen. I am a licensed counselor out in Colorado, and I practice primarily. I have my own clinical practice, and I work with people who have experienced trauma primarily, but also depression and anxiety, which tend to go, hand in hand with trauma. And specifically, I work with people who have experienced spiritual trauma and religious abuse. And one of the core things I try to do for those people, if this is their journey, if that's what they're looking for, is to help them try to find their way back to God, despite having experienced some significant hurt at the hands of, the people who bear His name. So, as a kind of addendum to that clinical practice, I started up my podcast, which is the Trauma Informed Church Kid. And we are in season 2 of that right now. So we're going through Exodus and Leviticus, which is objectively the best book of the Bible. And it's a little dig I have to get in every now and then. And the goal there is to, as I say in the tagline, reconstructing a religion for the hurting with theology that doesn't hurt. So the idea is to take a look at a second or third or fourth look at the Bible with a trauma-informed lens and through the eyes of just being aware of all the ways in which a classical, traditional, Protestant, evangelical American reading has caused hurt and harm to both the people of God and our witness out there in the world, and try to acknowledge that and repent from it and hopefully repair. So that's who I am. That's what I do.
And I will say that objectively, I think Spencer's is probably my favorite podcast to listen to. I listen to all of them. I really enjoy it, and I recommend it all the time to everybody. It's probably the only podcast that I listen to that I recommend every possible chance I get. So I do. I think it's really good stuff. And then actually, objectively, you're incorrect about Leviticus. So we're gonna have to have a Leviticus versus Ezekiel episode someday.
Yeah.
And settle this question.
My wife is a speech debate coach. And so, if you ever want to go down in Lincoln Douglas debate style, I know how it goes. A little bit on my own home turf there, but hey.
Hey, that doesn't sound very objective to me when your wife is the referee.
Yeah, I know.
Anyway, so
Uh,
today we are continuing our slow series of indetermined episode numbers because we're just going to pull it.
Nathan Jacob style.
We started with a single video and now we're on episode 3, and then episode 4 is in the works and planned and on the calendar, and I'm excited about that one too, because that one's going to be, if you ever want to see people arguing about things and being grumpy on my channel, that will be the episode to come to, because
All right.
normally we try to be nice around here. But that one we're going to get into some things that are going to be a little contentious and painful, I think. So
Okay.
that will be a little bit of a different episode, but it will fit right in with what we've been doing in this series that eventually started with one video, and then I talked Spencer into another one, and now I talked him into another one, because I think this is important, because there's so many things that are hard to read, and I will go back and put the series links in the description, because we talked about war, and we've talked about genocide, and we've talked about, you know, some of the hard parts, especially in the Old Testament, and those things that people usually criticize the Bible for and don't like the Old Testament for, and things like that. So, but today I wanted to do something different, because we are launching into prepping for the holidays. And like for some of us, the holidays, Advent started on Saturday. And not everybody gets to do it as cool as that long of an Advent, but we're getting ready to Thanksgiving coming up, and Christmas is coming up, and New Year's is coming up, and that tends to be a very complicated time for people, because it's
Extremely.
there's you know, it's not all good for everybody all the time. And I would say that I think maybe Spencer, my first question would be like, is it just complicated for everyone? It's not all just good. Yay, it's the holidays. It's complicated and messy for everybody.
Yeah, I think that probably is, if we're really honest with ourselves, is true. There's a reason why there is a kind of Christmas movie formula out there that's fairly universal in terms of reminding people, you know, the reason for the season and those kind of things. It's because Christmas time and the holidays is something that carries an awful lot of very complex and ambivalent emotions. Like for instance, the closest holiday we have coming up is Thanksgiving, which for me is a wonderful delight. Yes, that has a lot to do with the fact that I am fairly close to my family and continue to stay in touch with them. But it has a lot of good memories from when I was growing up. We would all get together at grandma's house and have, you know, a buffet style Thanksgiving and watch football afterwards and all those things. But I know that there are many, many people for whom the idea of getting together with your family is deeply unsettling. And in some cases, just flat out not safe. So, it's hard to navigate a world, whether it's Thanksgiving or Christmas, that is just saturated with it's the holidays, be happy, reason for the season. Let's get together with family, like as a cultural expectation. And for some people, that's just not wise. So yeah, it's tough.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I think as we're launching into this season, that there's also a lot of spiritual and church trauma that's associated with this. And as you're trying to read the Bible, and it's what do you do when you try to read about God's love and God's hope and God's mercy, and being having gratitude, when those are hard and hurtful to read, you know, because
Right.
sometimes. So Spencer, let's just start there. Can you just kind of walk us through, like, how does that work when reading about good things and love and mercy are hurtful? Like, how do we get there in the first place?
Oof. So nothing like diving in the deep end. um,
This is my channel. We're in
oh
deep calls
boy,
deep around
I know,
here.
I know. You're like, oh boy.
We don't mess around here.
All right, strapping in. Um, all kidding aside, though, it is, yeah, it's very difficult. I was just talking with a client today, actually, about this, where I was mentioning how we know we've heard a lot about like the problem of evil. You know, people asking things like, why do bad things happen? And if God is good, why is there suffering and all that stuff? Very important question to answer, but a question kind of related to that that people don't necessarily always think about is the problem of miracles or the problem of goodness.
Mm,
And what I mean by that is we read through the Bible and we encounter stories where like people are miraculously healed or people are brought back from the dead. I mean, again, literally just talking with a client about someone who had experienced infant loss,
mhm,
and they were asking that question of like, okay, so Jesus wept at the tomb of Lazarus. Okay, great. That tells us he has empathy for us. But then what happened next is he brought him back from the dead. And why couldn't that have happened for my
mhm,
infant son? You know, like those kinds of things are seriously hard questions to wrestle with. And it's so tempting, especially maybe even especially at this time of the year when everyone's like, you know, be grateful, be generous, you know, give out of your blessing, all those things. It's very tempting for people just to say, well, just focus on the good stuff. Like, I mean, yeah, okay, the pain's there and yeah, the loss is there, but let's not lose sight of the good things and let's just make sure that we focus on that and remember that no matter what pain happens, it's all going to be okay in the end, which is something we call spiritual bypassing. Taking a theological truth, because it is a truth,
mhm,
but using it, leveraging it as a means to not experience the fullness of life, and all its depth and complexity and shades of dark and light and everything else, in trying to kind of override those emotional states through just
mhm,
sheer force of belief. And that is deeply problematic. That is something that causes people to distrust their emotions in really unhealthy ways. It's something that causes people to feel really guilty and
mhm,
shamed for just perfectly human normal reactions. Um, and ultimately that question of why didn't Jesus bring my boy back or whatever it is, why didn't this miracle happen
mhm,
to me, is perfectly valid to ask. Not just because it's very human, but because it's also very biblical,
mhm.
incredibly so.
I remember way back when I was first struggling with when I was diagnosed with this autoimmune condition that
Mhm.
that I have been privileged to live with for a very long time now. And we were, going through about 4.5 years of just trying to stay alive for
Mm.
the beginning of
Mhm.
this whole thing. And it was one of these rounds where we had come back from the transplant workup again, and it was another miracle of being alive. And I was struggling with that. I don't know if anybody has ever been through the process of medically being evaluated for an organ transplant, but it is
Oof.
torture. It is
Yes.
torture. There is
Yeah.
nothing to it but torture. And I was just like, and when you're like 14, that's not the funnest thing in the world. And so I remember getting back and I was really depressed and really struggling and I was really just having a rough time. And a well meaning older woman in our church walked up and said to me, "You must be so grateful to be alive and this miracle that God has given you." And I
Oh,
remember
boy.
that I wanted to spit in her face. I
Yep.
was so upset. And that
Mhm.
that just has, that's one of those things that just stuck with me forever. I like that is such a
Yep.
vivid memory. And now I still have a knee-jerk reaction when people say something like that to someone else,
Mhm. Mhm.
because I'm like, I really am wanting to believe that you have no idea what you just said to this
Yeah,
person.
right. Because
Because
if you do have any idea, then we got a really big problem here.
it's just, Lord have
Yes.
mercy. from that whole situation. And so
Yes.
now it took me a very long time to be able to interact with the miracles, the healing stories in the
Yes.
Gospels,
Hmm.
because it was
Hmm.
like, why did I have to sit through all of that? Why do I have to fake
Hmm.
being grateful around everybody because that's the expectation when I feel terrible
Yeah.
and
Right.
I'm set up so the rest of my life is going to be painful torture.
Mhm.
And like, and I'm reading stories where God is raising dead children and God is instantly healing women with bleeding issues and blindness and lameness. And why am I left to sit like this?
Mhm.
And, these good miracle blessings that God gives out, why don't I get one? And
Right.
Spencer, what, like, the process of being able to try to start to turn that, to step away from that those things being painful to
Yeah.
those things being the hopeful reminders that they are.
Yes. Well, the first step in all of those, whenever we have uncomfortable emotions or difficult emotions, is, and I know it sounds trite and cheap, and I get that, but it also is something most people remember because of that. I always say we have to feel it to heal it. Like
Mhm,
we really, really do. So that's one of the reasons why the approach that very well meaning, I'm sure, lovely elderly lady did is so unhelpful in most cases. Where they and well, and that's why we call it spiritual bypassing,
mhm,
is bypassing the emotion. It's not going through the emotion, whether it's grief or loss or anger or fear or depression or any of those things. It's trying to go around the emotion, to not feel the emotion. And that always causes problems. Not just because, from a purely humanist standpoint of like, oh, yeah, we need to, we're worshiping at the altar of our emotions and we have to, search your heart. What does your feelings tell you? And like, not because of that, but just because this is how God made us. All of our emotions are reflections of God. They are part of the image of God in us. God himself has emotions. I mean, of course, they're of a totally different uh, sort of experience than
mhm,
ours are, but he is deeply moved to compassion for his people. He is furiously angry when they continually trample all over his good gifts that he has given them. When they continually rebel and not just rebel, but like prostitute themselves to everybody who comes within 5 feet of them. He is uh, just livid at any evil done to
mhm,
the people that he loves. He is fiercely protective of the vulnerable and the widow and the orphan and all the others. So, I mean, God has plenty of emotions. Well, and also he's joyously happy. Like I don't
mhm,
want to say this like it's always, the unpleasant emotions, because those are the ones we kind of focus on when it comes to God. But I mean, Jesus tells a story about how a father goes running to his son who ran away and completely dishonors himself in the sight of anyone watching by running. First of all, second of all, like uh, crying tears all over his neck and bringing him back, even though he's already pretty much socially slapped his father in the face. And bring him back into the home and throwing a big party. Like this is,
mm,
and that's supposed to be a reflection of who God is. So there's, in terms of trying to answer that very big question of like, how do we get from feeling and wondering why not me to believing in those truths? It does not come through bypassing the emotions. It
mhm,
comes through the emotions, to feel them, to allow them to be real. Now, allowing them to be felt and to be real does not mean that we are then run by them, that we are
mhm,
controlled by them. And this is part of the, as you know, the Eastern Orthodox concept of the passions,
mhm,
which I don't know why I keep calling Eastern Orthodox, just because they I guess like focus on that a lot, but it's all over Scripture. Like it's in Romans
yeah,
7:5, for example. Like it's
yep,
not created out of thin air. But anyway, point being, or it's also in James as well. Point being is that we don't want to let our emotional states make us passive. That's where the word passions comes from.
Mhm.
Is that they are movements of our psychosomatic self, that move us in a certain direction without really our consent or will or cooperation. It's just we see something and we immediately react to it. Now, that reaction, just purely on its own level as a reaction, as a movement, is not anti God. God himself
Mhm.
is moved, as we talked about.
Mhm.
But the difference, though, is that God chooses to be moved. He moves himself toward and away from people, not because he is controlled by those passions and they make him passive and act upon him. That's what happens to us. That's not necessarily what happens to God. What um but he chooses to move either toward or away, or or to be deeply moved in his bowels and stuff like that. Um so how we can be more Christ-like and more God-like is by doing that, by noticing that initial movement of the emotion and allowing it to be there as a real thing, which might be a thing we need to repent of. It might be a thing we need to, and not repent of in the sense of like, oh my gosh, what a horrible, worthless sinner I am, but repent of in the sense of like, this is not godlike. I need to make myself more godlike, more like Christ by receiving this and then turning it into a gift, a sacrifice. Make your bodies living sacrifices, including our emotions, which are primarily felt in our bodies. So, what that process of feeling the emotion and going through the emotion, and then being able to, on the other side, be able to see the truth and the beauty on the other side, it does look like feeling it. It also looks like not being passive to it. And it finally looks like it has to look like something in community, because we we are so tempted to like to do it on our own, solo and by ourselves. I mean, that's kind of the American individualism at work. But the problem with this whole internal struggle with the passions, so to speak, is that we don't know what we don't know. And that's one of the things that makes spiritual trauma so insidious, is that it takes, someone gives us an inner critic and then says, this is the
Mhm.
voice of God. And that colors our view of God. And so we have to have other viewpoints. We have to have other nooses, other minds, other
Mhm.
hearts, working with ours, so that we can be able to know our blind spots, see our blind spots, and um, in some cases, if they're like a spiritual father or mother, submit and do what does not feel normal, because that's kind of the point. Like, we're not supposed to be
Mhm.
doing what feels normal. We're supposed to be doing what feels more, um, what is more like Christ. And if we have a serious problem that we need to overcome, then it will feel odd. That's that's a feature, not a bug. But yeah. Anyway, so
Yeah.
that's
Well,
kind of the long-winded explanation of a very big question.
right. No, it was a big question. So, and it it this is one of those episodes where I just didn't prep anything, and I'm just like, so prepare to be surprised, Spencer,
I like it.
because we're
I'm
just gonna
good.
throw them out.
I'll strap in.
So, because as I'm thinking about, as many of us grew up in traditions, or in uh, denominations or non-denominations, however you want to look at that, in a lot of it seems like low church
Hmm.
traditions that struggle with how to interact with things that are very internal, that have
Yes.
to do with anything deeper. And I
Yes.
wasn't intending to go here, but I'm going to because I just taught a class on this on Monday, and I think it's relevant
Yes.
because when you have a theology that doesn't understand what the image of God actually is,
Hmm.
how do you find that again when you don't even know what you're looking for?
Right.
And how do I, as someone who is trying to re-engage and find God that doesn't hurt and to experience the love of God in a way that doesn't hurt and interact with my community in a way that doesn't hurt. But I don't even know, you know, how do I do that when I don't have a theology of a person in the first place?
Oh boy. Yeah, you really are batting 1,000. That's okay. I'll just summarize my 4-part anthropology nerd alert series that I did in my podcast, and I'll just do it in 10 minutes. No, I won't. uh, how did how do you do that without that clear sense of who a person is? Yeah. Yeah, you're wrestling with exactly the problem in the Christian West. Because
Mhm,
in the West we have what is called the nature grace divide, which is something that started with Augustine. And um the idea there is that because one of the effects of the fall was it severed the natural connection. There's a nature part, the natural connection between God and creatures, between God and his creation, specifically between God and humans. And so then the natural or the entailment of that doctrine is that if anything good happens, it can only have come from God, that there is nothing natural or native to humanity that is godlike anymore. And so we require not just to get us across the finish line, but to have us do anything at all. We require divine grace. There's the grace part of the nature grade divide, grace divide, to step in and do something supernatural,
mhm,
above nature, different than nature. And I know that sounds kind of heady and like up at 30,000 feet, but I mean, bringing it down to my own life and my own practice. Um, I have wrestled myself, and I see people wrestle all the time with the question of like, is this God or is this me? Or I want
mhm,
me to go away and God to step in, almost as if like I myself am at my core am an impediment to God, to goodness. And that kind of thinking and theology really messes with your head big time. Now, is this diminishing sin? No, not at all. Like again,
mhm,
this is an east west divide. If you listen to some of the ascetics and the desert fathers and a few of the other monks and various other figures in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, they are incredibly like they take sin very seriously, and they keep saying things like, "Oh my gosh, like how sick is my heart? Like what is wrong here?"
mhm,
But there's a world of difference from coming to that conclusion from a place of my heart is good, it's just been twisted, and it needs to be untwisted. That's the
mhm,
Eastern view that retains the nature
mhm,
grace connection. And my heart is sick, sinful, evil, and there's nothing even remotely good in it. And God requires a snap of his fingers to make it happen, because that makes exactly the problem we've been wrestling with so far today.
mhm,
The miracle question, that makes that the sharpest possible.
mhm,
Because if goodness only happens when God manually pushes the button, so to speak, like steps in and creates goodness, you know, almost ex nihilo, if that's the only time goodness happens, then every single moment of our lives is filled with that question
mhm,
of like, where is God and why isn't he being good? Compared to a view that connects the nature and grace in the East, where we say things like, God is everywhere present and filling all things. And for he is good and loves mankind. And like Paul says in the Areopagus, in him we live and move and have our being. He
Mhm.
uses Christian, so to speak, language in him, like in Christ, that kind of thing, to describe when he's talking to pagans in the Areopagus. So it's not the Western nature grace divide creates this image of the person and the self that is evil, twisted, wicked, horrible, worm, those kind of
Mhm.
things. And God, through some process that is utterly opaque to us, steps into some people in some situations and seemingly arbitrarily makes goodness come out of their life. In the East,
Mhm.
we have a picture where God is in everything, always working, always breathing, always making good happen, bringing grace in every single situation.
Mhm.
Um, and I think those two views of God, and they really are two views of God, having spent some time in both, um, those two views of God have totally different outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just thinking a couple things. Like I want to put an asterisk or a caveat or something on what you said, because
How
this is
dare you
one of
qualify my
my
rhetoric?
this is one of my thing that I was forced into being one of my favorite topics, because
Yeah.
I come from a tradition that views almost that created a situation where the view of image of God and the connection of image of God that we grew up understanding is that God is like a planet and we are like an image is like the satellite that isn't
Like a
connected at
moon
all,
that
that just
revolves around.
orbiting and just, yeah, so there's no actual connection there.
Right.
And that is, so I want to just make clear, when you're talking about the grace disconnect, that
Uh-huh.
that is not the fact that we are completely disconnected from the image of God, because we never lose that connection. We
Correct.
always have that connection to the image of God. But
Yes.
sometimes that grace disconnect can cause like an emotional blockage that is hard for us to
Yes.
communicate and be in relationship with God, because there's the
Hmm.
block there. So
Right.
we don't
Right.
lose our connection to image of God.
Right.
That does get twisted and it can get covered over.
Yep.
And
Yep.
like Saint Macrina talks a lot about like understanding of image of God being like a mirror that we see
Hmm.
ourselves through in Christ through, but
Hmm.
that mirror getting covered in layers of dirt, and the process of
Yeah.
theosis is scraping off all of those layers of mud, which is what pain
Yeah.
and suffering does in our life, is
Yeah.
to excavate that to help us find our Christ
Yeah.
likeness
Yep.
in the full image that we have. So we're not
Sounds a lot
saying
like
we're
St. Paul, 1 Corinthians 13 or 2 Corinthians 3, like both of those
yeah,
images. Yeah, same thing.
those when I first started exploring Orthodoxy, I had a very hard time reading the Cappadocian Fathers, and now
Mm.
I'm like living there. Now that
I
I
was gonna say,
understand them,
okay, okay, because
like,
that's really fascinating. Because I was also going to cite, Saint Gregory of Nyssa, because
mhm,
he uses the analogy of Christ's parable of the woman who was searching for a
mhm,
lost coin, and he's
yep,
saying that like the image of God is that lost coin. It's not
mhm,
taken out of the house and put somewhere else. It's not. It's
mhm,
it's still in the house. It's just buried. It's swallowed up by our sin hoarder tendencies, and Christ comes in as the woman,
mhm.
and sweeps the place out and cleans it out and finds the coin and then invites everybody in for a party. Again, there's that, joyous
Right.
emotion of God. So yeah.
But it was also having to restore and fix the ontology that I
Yes.
am not a corrupt, morally corrupt, horrible creature that somehow God can't stand until some miraculous process that nobody could explain
Yes. Yes.
happened, that God could
Until he makes a legal fiction happen that follows
right,
his own rules that he has
right,
arbitrarily set up.
right,
Sorry,
which
I don't
creates
mean to
like
be I don't mean to be um caricaturing and but I
it's
sorry, the further
yeah,
away I get from that view, the more I'm convinced that it actually isn't a caricature. It's just the
mm-mm,
logical entailment of the position. So
Yeah,
sorry.
it's okay. So many people don't think down the line of if I believe what I just heard, if I follow it to its end, where does it go? A lot of people don't do that, and so I don't think people quite always internalize what
Right.
they hear and don't realize the impact that has on us until you start to have somebody point at these things out to you, and you're just like, wait a second, because this is how the love of God gets hard to read. If I'm this horrible,
Precisely.
corrupt saying that God can't love until some
Yes.
magical process happens that I don't even know how. So how do I do
Yes.
that? And how do I know that it happened? How
Yes.
can God love
How do
me?
I know that it happened? Yeah, that's a big, big one. Yeah, I actually coined a term, and to my knowledge, is my coinage. I've mainlined so much information. I
Mhm,
probably have. It's entirely possible I picked it up somewhere, but whatever. I used to call it God has to wear his sun glasses
mhm,
when he looks at us. SON glasses.
mhm,
Because in that Western Protestant evangelical model, we are, like Luther would say, snow covered dung. We are
mhm,
dung. And we have a robe of righteousness put on us, or we have snow that is Christ's purity put on us, but it doesn't change the dungness. We are still
mhm,
dung. And if at any point, we don't actually submit to, we don't keep the robe on, then we're just back to being dung. And God looks at us as worms and has every right to squash us at any time and
mhm.
bring eternal judgment for even the smallest infraction. And that is purely his right, and completely just to do so. But thankfully, he has his sunglasses on. And so now he doesn't even see us. And that's really the problem, is like the
Mhm.
sunglasses make it so that he doesn't actually see Spencer. He doesn't
Right.
love Spencer. He loves Christ and the little turd that is Spencer that's somewhere in there.
Yeah. And I know that I had a lot of conversations at the beginning of trying to get this process and fixed, and why I'm now so adamant about talking about the image of God with people, because it makes a huge difference. If it's the difference between the dung analogy and or someone who is like a chronic illness patient,
Mm-hmm.
and how that affects how you interact about God and interact with God. Because if I'm already garbage, how can God love me?
Right.
But if I'm sick and I need help,
Bingo.
God,
Yes.
that's why the full of, and that's when the miracle story started to change for me. When it
Yes.
was like, nope, I'm not broken, horrible, morally corrupt, terrible creation.
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
And no, I'm just really soul sick and I have a lot of soul wounds that really need
Mm-hmm.
care.
Mm-hmm. Care,
That is so
not
different.
wrath. Care.
Right, exactly. Right, and that's
Well,
why
not
it's
punishment,
so,
I should say.
and
Yeah.
this is one of my growing pet peeves, and this is probably the only time I'm gonna say this, because I have to be careful, otherwise I get a little snarky and spicy about it. Uh, when I've started to hear, especially like at school, or I've been hearing online, for a while now, Protestants borrowing the language of the church as a hospital, and I just cringe when I hear
Yep.
that now, because it's like, if if you've thrown out all of your medical training for all of human history, and you
Yeah. Right.
just decide to experiment with whatever you find on the side of the road, it's
Yep.
harder to help people.
I don't want to go to that hospital.
And I'll just leave it at that.
No, no, I
Because
1000%
no,
agree with you.
I
Like
don't.
that's why I refer to myself as an ortho-friendly lapsed Protestant. um, because I I do agree. Like when the Reformation happened, it disconnected I mean, there were certainly things that needed to be fixed about the medieval Catholic Church. Oh yes, yeah, hmm very much yes, very very much yes. I actually have a quote from Jonathan Edwards in my latest podcast episode about wrath that is
Mhm.
pretty grotesque. So yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
I'm not a fan. But anyway, yeah, when we as Protestants have kind of disconnected our understanding of the Bible and our
Mhm.
tradition from the historical church and the historical faith, it really leaves us adrift. And it's really hard to read the Bible with any kind of fidelity because it's literally every man and woman and child for themselves.
Mhm.
Um, and that has, I understand the attraction of it, having lived 40 plus years there or 40 years there. But I do not, I don't see the wisdom of it. There's a lot of things that are attractive that are unwise. So, nevertheless, that's kind of a side note, but
Yeah. We're kind of veering off
yeah,
into some
I
other
know. That's why I'm like,
territory
okay,
here that
reel it back, Spencer, reel it
we need to get back into where we're going because,
back.
it's regardless of where you are coming out of. And, I again, I have to really work hard to put my own personal thoughts on this on the side here that, you know, regardless of where we are coming out of, Spencer, how do we, like, if so like, how do we be able to sit down and try to separate reading God's love and that God loved us, internalizing that? And sometimes you have to go through and re-experience some of those, little old well-meaning church ladies.
Hmm.
And how do we do that in a way that gets us to seeing Christ in scripture the way he wants to show himself to us there, and not re-traumatize ourselves in the process of having to walk through that hard part? Because you absolutely, this is one of the things that I'm also learning too. You absolutely have to, but learning how to do it instead of sitting there, and this, like, for my, at least my experience has been, instead of sitting there reading that, having those old things come up and having to fight through that, you start with this whole, I love the imagery in Joshua of with the army. God goes before, God's in the middle, and
Mm.
God goes behind. So
Hmm.
Christ is all the way around you and with you in the middle of it while you're going through it, like taking the shepherd's hand and walking through it with Christ. Like, how do we do that, Spencer? That's hard.
Yep, it is. Um, this is why I think the whole East-West divide thing was a necessary interlude, rather than a diversion. Because how we see God has a big deal on it has a big impact on whether or not we can receive God. So think of it this way: like if well, actually, as a uh, as a marriage and family counselor, as well as an individual counselor, I encounter this where a marriage will be humming along smoothly by all accounts, and the way that one partner sees the other is there's trust there. They, when someone says, hey, I'm going to head back to work for a couple of hours, when the context of that relationship is trust, there isn't a lot of extra wondering or worrying or checking up on or anything else like that. They just go, oh, okay, all right, see you when you get home. And that's the end of it, because our view of that person affects every tiny little interaction. And when that relational context is broken, I have seen just horrific damage from that, where people will just roll their eyes and get into screaming matches, and or just silent bitterness and anger about very simple, small things like the way they put dishes away or just the way they breathe. I mean, quite literally, I have seen that happen to multiple people because the way we see the other person affects everything about
Mhm.
how we interact with that person. And that's true on the human level, but that's also true on the vertical level, divine and human. So if we see God as being somebody who only gifts us goodness when he arbitrarily decides that he's going to because we were elect from the foundation of the world, or for whatever reason, maybe only gifts us goodness so that he can then take it away and make us vessels of wrath and eventually increase his glory. Who knows? I don't know. But if if that's the way we see it, if that's the way we see God, if that's what our theology tells us is God, then every single interaction we have with God is going to be colored by that
Mhm.
view of him, that belief. And I can say that from personal experience. I have not necessarily had that, hardcore 5 point tulip Calvinist perspective taught to me, but I have had taught to me that the sunglasses idea,
Mhm.
that you that there was just something so bad about me that God had to and was entirely justified in
Mhm.
punishing me for all eternity. And so, but thankfully, it's okay because someone else has taken the punishment. Um, and so now you can be okay with this person who couldn't stand the sight of you. That, and insofar as he does love you, he's not really looking at you; he's looking at someone else. So, like, I hope the connections are clear to people. So, okay, that's a fine diagnosis. What do we do about it? What's the solution?
Mhm.
Um, it starts with this is why theology matters.
Mhm.
um, we have to have a correct view of God in order to be able to actually have a relationship with him. And that's one of the reasons why I just cringe deep to my bones whenever I hear people say it's not a religion, it's a relationship, man. Um,
Yeah. Right.
because the relationship is
Mhm.
determined by your religion.
Mhm.
It is. And so and the tradition that you've been taught and brought up in. So if we go back to the Bible and we go back to the historical way in which God has always been viewed by his faithful people from the Jewish people all the way up to the early Christian centuries and beyond. We see a God who does not hate mankind but loves them deeply.
Mhm.
And so I think the antidote to what we've been describing is starting with a foundational, fundamental, fervent, and unrelenting belief in God is love. For he is good and loves mankind. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that he did not come into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world. That God demonstrated his own love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That is not a means of satisfying his wrath. That is a means of demonstrating his love. Like that's what the Bible tells us.
Mhm.
And going back to that, and that's why I do my podcast. That's why I spend so much time on the theology of it all, because that is immensely practical in everyday life and in real life. Is what we believe about God affects every time we come to him in prayer. Do we think that he actually is a good father ready to give good gifts? Or are we always holding out some belief in the background that, well, I really don't know. And whatever
Mhm.
he does, whether he blesses me or not, is going to be totally just because it just by default is. Like that kind of perspective on God, there is no serious, honest relationship possible. There just isn't. There is plenty of worship possible.
Mhm.
I mean, you can be afraid of that God. You can worship that God. You can say that
Mhm.
God is holy and glorious and amazing, but you can never have a relationship with that God.
Yeah, it's like, how do you build trust and connection with God if his love for you can get lost like your car keys at any random point in time? Like, I can't trust that. I can't trust that God loves me. I can't trust that God wants the best for me if, because outside my neighbor put the trash can on the wrong side of the street and all of a sudden God doesn't love me anymore. Like, how is that? I mean, it's kind of a ridiculous example, but I mean, some of it just feels that way sometimes. It's just like, why in the world, like, if God doesn't, how can I be in relationship with God if I have to worry all the time if he really loves me or not? If what I just did, or the fact that I woke up in a bad mood this morning and all of a sudden now it's going to make God offended and I have to, like, and then I get to where, you know, I saw this short by a priest in down in California, and it was absolutely fantastic. And he said something to the effect of, when we are in a place where you have to pretend with God, God doesn't want to be in relationship with the pretend you. Like, God wants to be in relationship with you. And so theology that puts us in a place where we have to perform, like with that little old lady who was so, well-meaningly intentioned, trying to focus on the positives, and maybe, Spencer, in that kind of situation, if you're trying to show love of God and to appreciate miracles that are happening, but instead of imposing your interpretation upon that, to sit down with them and say, how are you feeling about how things are going right now? And then we can get around to the part about appreciating the fact that
Yes.
God is sustaining in miracles and things,
Yes.
and not skipping the emotions of that situation, because sometimes I might be really conflicted about what's going on. And
Yep.
I know that eventually it's going to be good, but right now it hurts like heck. And my life
Yep.
really sucks and I don't like
Yep.
it. But good things are going to come, but I'm not in a place where I want to hear that from you or anybody else. So
Yep.
acknowledging the feelings first and
Mm-hmm.
then going in around through it to get there at a certain point might minimize a little bit of some of that little old lady church damage that we do to each other
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
in
Yeah.
that.
To go back to the analogy of working with couples, I use an acronym with them, EAR. Empathize, accept, and then respond.
Mhm.
And I think that's a good process for all of us to remember whenever we're speaking the truth in love. Is we can still speak the truth, but it's love when we invest in that personal, emotional, relational connection with the person. So when someone says, I don't know if I can trust God, he's
Mhm.
he didn't come show up in my life. I begged and pleaded with him on my knees, and it felt like I was speaking to thin air. Um, the first thing out of our mouths cannot be, well, you really can. And dear God, please don't let it be something like, well, it's probably because you just didn't believe hard enough, or you
Mhm.
probably got some unconfessed sin, or anything like that.
I've heard all
It,
of those. Yes, the
me too.
checklist of here's the proof of how God
Yep.
actually was there,
Yep.
and you just
Yep.
you just were
Yep.
too dumb to see it.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Lord, oh Lord,
God,
have
uh,
mercy.
yes, exactly. Exactly. God, contrary to all appearances, is actually
Mhm.
just a machine.
Mhm.
Input X, output Y. And if you
Mhm.
don't get Y, it's because you didn't put X in right.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's
So you're saying,
ridiculous.
Spencer, if I wanted this good thing, but this bad thing happened, I punched in the wrong number on God the vending machine and got the wrong thing? It's just me being
Yes.
spicy again. Um,
D7. And when I really meant to do C7. Dang it.
that's right. I got the peanut thing when I wanted the chocolate thing.
Yeah.
Dang like,
Yeah.
because so many of those, like the theology I grew up in, felt very much like God was a vending machine, and
Yeah. It really is.
somehow I hit the wrong number when I got the bad thing when I wanted the good thing.
So, and that highlights a really important way to kind of hopefully move ourselves in the direction of
Hmm.
healing from that
Hmm.
perspective is that east west divide I talked about earlier. Um, in uh, in if we have this God is everywhere filling all things mentality, then every single moment of our lives is a gift from God in a
Hmm.
very real, tangible, felt sense. I can, like, that's literally one of the things I've been working on myself just personally. So I'm going to go ahead and give some self disclosure here to make sure that people know this is not just me speaking out of hat. Um, I really, really struggle with anger, irritation, and blowing up and losing my temper. We talked earlier about passions, the moving me. Nothing wrong with anger as an emotion, but we can sin while we're angry, like Paul says, in your anger, do not sin.
Hmm.
Or wait, no, that's Jesus. I'm drawing a
I
blank.
think
Anyway,
they both say it in different
yeah,
forms, but yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So that's something I really struggle with, particularly when it comes to handling my daughter. There has been she has some unique needs and difficulties, and it I definitely lose it a lot. And one of the things that I've been trying to do lately that has helped quite immensely is every time I encounter something that causes that movement of the passions in me, is to take a breath and go, this is a gift. This is a gift. This is a gift. And by that, I don't mean the kind of guilting me into, well, you're going to miss these moments when she gets
Mhm.
to be old and a teenager and doesn't want to see you anymore. Not that. But I mean gift in the sense that, like, she herself is a gift from God. This moment of
Mhm.
irritation and frustration and pain and difficulty is also a gift from God. That it is a chance for me to, it's a sacrament. It's a chance
Mhm.
for me to partake of it and receive it either in a worthy or an unworthy manner. If I partake of it worthily, then it will contribute to my salvation because I will be controlling the passions. I will be not causing a generational sin to continue in her life through no fault of her own. I will be purifying my own heart and making myself more clean. But again, this is all with God's.
Right.
This is what I strive mightily with all His power that He works within me. So if anyone's getting all monergistically twitchy, just settle down. Anyway, sorry, I'm spicy too.
Right.
Um,
It's okay.
but anyway, the point is
Mhm.
that trying to, in some ways, it is forcing myself. In other ways,
Mhm.
it's really activating the truth that I
Mhm.
already know, but I just can't see in the moment. And I already
Mhm.
believe, but I just can't feel in the moment. And just going, this is a gift. I need to receive what is happening right now as a way to bring me either closer to bring me closer to God and to bring her and to build her up and all those things. And does that work every time? Oh, no, no. Um, do I do it perfectly? No. Do I do it better than I did yesterday? Yes. So,
Sometimes we don't even do that. Sometimes we take a step backwards. And,
mhm.
I think God is
Yeah,
merciful with that too,
yeah,
because you can't expecting
that too is
somebody
the
to get
gift.
better every single time. That doesn't
Yes,
account for
yes,
bad days and days when we struggle and days when it's
yes.
hard. And I just can't do that one more time. And,
Hmm.
having raised a daughter who went through some pretty profound challenges herself, I wish I would have had the image of God and icon
Hmm.
theology that I have now, because
Hmm.
I did the best I could to try to use some kind of completely blind luck version of trying to do that without knowing any of it. myself, but to have, we had adopted a child from China when she was just about 2 years old, and so the attachment issues, and it was
Hmm.
a hot mess for quite a while.
Yep.
And there is very little in life that is harder than having to restrain your toddler from trying to injure themselves, and
Yes.
that is really a hard thing to do. And so
Absolutely.
to have the theology I have now, to be able to try to separate and step back and say, this child is trying to I need to see her icon because she can't see it herself. And to look beyond all that pain and to look beyond all of those challenges, because kids don't see, I still don't see
Hmm.
my own icon. I'm
Hmm.
still in the process of learning what that looks like.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
if we can learn to have that same compassion, that
Hmm.
all of our icons are still in the process of being uncovered and discovered, that, we call it theosis, and the West calls it sanctification, justification, and
Yeah. Yeah.
salvation.
Michael Gorman calls it cruciformity. Yes.
That
Yes.
thing, that
Yes.
we're all works in process. But to be able to step back, which I think is also one of those things that has been antidote to the little old church lady, to be like, I can look past that and see her icon, to see
Mhm.
what she was trying to do,
Yes.
and turn
Well,
those words.
absolutely. And that perspective is definitely part of what helps to heal and helps to begin to see God's goodness everywhere. So you were talking about that kind of
Mhm,
icon and image of God theology and how important that is. Well, I mean, that connects directly back to atonement. Like one of the reasons, and this is something I've really reflected hard on,
mhm,
is one of the reasons why I had this propensity to get angry and to like lash out or something is even though I had intellectually let go of the retributive justice model, I still held on to it in my heart. And in many ways, I still do have
mhm,
roots in my heart about retributive justice. Because in that Western retributive justice model, the main problem is that we need to receive as a pure gift without any work on our part whatsoever the icon back that we are no longer images of God. We have lost the icon, lost the image, and we have to get it back through a gift of grace. Again, like in
mhm,
this purely arbitrary sense. Um, and so any punishment that God levels against wrongdoing is entirely justified because he's not leveling it against his own images. He's leveling it against these twisted, misshapen, devilish creatures. And it's perfectly acceptable to do that. And I can tell you with all honesty and transparency and um, Lord have mercy, that in my worst moments, I see other people that way, including my daughter,
mhm,
as being because that's how I was taught to see people who were doing wrong. I was taught to see that in myself, and I continue to see that in other people who I encounter in the world who are doing wrong, including my daughter. Compared to uh, the Eastern perspective on atonement, which is that restored icon,
mhm,
that restored image model, the hospital for the sick, like that you were talking about earlier.
mhm,
I don't see, or when I have that theology front and center, let's put it that way, because I don't do this all the time.
mhm,
But when I have that theology front and center, which is what this is a gift is meant to do, um, then I can see what's happening in front of me with my daughter as being a moment of a sick person on a bed. And I don't lash out at the person and say, "Why are you sick? What is wrong with you?
mhm,
How could you possibly have gotten sick in this way?" I say, "Okay, let's find the sickness. Let's find the illness. Let's root it out. Let's pull it out. And let's make you better. Um, make you not make you better. That's the wrong way to say that.
mm-mm,
Make you who
yeah,
you were supposed to be. bring you into full health and fullness and wholeness. Um, yes.
So instead of make you who you are to be, I'm just wondering because I've some conversations that I've had the last week or so with some folks, but to be like, right now, this person that I'm trying to deal with, you know, when I'm dealing with my child or my spouse, or you know, like if I'm looking at that and they're struggling to you know to rediscover and to see their own icon, and really what is happening is more like they are in the throes of getting rid of food poisoning,
Mm-hmm.
and that's I have to sit there with them because they have to get that up. They just got to purge it out.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to be there with the bucket and the water and the chicken soup, and as patiently as possible remember that they didn't want to eat whatever it was that made them sick like this,
Right.
but they have to just sometimes you got to purge all that out. And
Yep.
that, you know, it I try to be more patient that way. I still am a work in progress. That's definitely for sure.
We all are. Yeah. I don't, and that's why I'm trying to be confessional and transparent
Right.
a little bit here, is because I don't want this to sound like I'm preaching from a high horse at people. I want it to be more like this is something that I am actively in the process of wrestling with. And
Hmm.
all the fervency that I display toward particular positions and theologies is something that I then turn inward and say, I believe, Lord, help my unbelief.
Hmm.
So,
So Spencer, I want to we're going to jump back into the holiday thing here. And so we're about to sit in uh joy to the world, the incarnation. How do I do that and be joyful when my life sucks and I'm depressed?
ooh,
Right?
okay.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We've been talking about theology. I'm going to keep doing it.
mhm,
And if I lose anybody, I'm sorry. I would just encourage you to hang in there. Joy to the world, the Lord has come. Incarnation. Okay.
mhm,
Again, going back to East West, um, the East looks at the incarnation of Jesus as being the defining moment. The West tends to look at the cross as being the defining moment. And the incarnation was basically just kind of like proof that he was a pure sacrifice. And so basically just kind of like boot camp to get to the real thing, more or less. Whereas in the East, they look at the incarnation as being this is the moment at which humanity begins to be healed. So when you say and well, sorry, I mean we'll more stop. And the reason why humanity is healed is because humanity and divinity are united.
mhm,
Because the divine nature of God the Son was united to human nature, not a human, but human
mhm,
nature, and God took on flesh. You know, the Lord has come, Emmanuel, God with us. You know, all those things. What that means, what all those things mean, is not just simply that Jesus has showed up and at some point, 30 something odd years down the road, the good stuff is going to happen. What it means is God has shown up and is currently actively, from the moment of his birth, healing and purifying and redeeming and cleansing human nature. And so, and this is something we see in the Bible. Like Hebrews talks about how even though he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. And it talks about
mhm,
his suffering of, you know, offering up loud prayers and supplications to God. So when you say, how do I say joy to the world when I'm depressed? Okay, I'm not going to say Jesus was necessarily depressed per se, but I am going to say that Jesus suffered,
mhm,
and that helped him to purify our experience of suffering. So, what joy to the world the Lord has come means is that suffering is no longer meaningless. That suffering itself now has meaning. That death has meaning. That death becomes a means of our salvation. That depression becomes a means of our salvation. The anxiety becomes a means of our salvation. And I do not want to sit here and again, like preach at someone and say, well, you just got to believe it and you don't believe it enough. And that's why you don't have enough faith. And that's why you're depressed. That is absolute bull biscuits.
Right? Explicative word there.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
I mean to say all that just to say that like we have to get our theology right. When we understand that in the little trough where the creator of the universe was on Christmas morning, that was the moment at which he purified human infancy. That was the moment that he purified all the exhaustion that mothers and fathers go through. And as he continued to live his entire life in obedience to the Father, he was purifying every single one of our experiences. Just like when he went to the cross, that was the moment he purified death. Not just death, not just his manner of death, but any death at all. And when we understand that God with us and he joy of the world, the Lord has come, means that every single step and emotion and thought and feeling and word that comes out of his mouth, every single moment of Christ's life was a moment of our purification and cleansing. That shifts our experience of everything: depression, anxiety, trauma, all of it. And that's why I do that practice of this is a gift, even when I fail miserably, because I've also done that. And then I say, that too is a gift.
I think one of the things that I have learned in the process of changing over and transitioning from the West to the East is I have learned 3 things that are absolutely crucial to get right and that everything else has to go through. First, your Christology. You have got to get your Christology solid and correct. Second, image of God. You have got to get image of God correct. And third, ontology. You have got to get sin nature straightened out, because those things
wrapped up in that is teleology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's like those 3, those are the things people can get their heads around. You start getting really off into the spacier, teleology and some of this other stuff. You lose people, but those are 3 things people can understand, those 3 basics. Because like we're talking about, if the incarnation, and that is, this is joyful, even though I feel terrible. And you hear it a lot. John Chrysostom talked about this in Christology is so important because that which has not been assumed has not been healed. And when he's talking about why that matters so much, because Christ assumes all of humanity and humanness to heal it. That doesn't mean he's absorbing that, Western Latin West moral corrupt nature of sin. That's not what's happening, because that would have invalidated the incarnation right there, dead stop. But with sin, and you look at it in the Eastern way, that it is that sickness that contaminates our souls, Christ is assuming that, and is the great physician cleansing and healing that. Take you to the book of Isaiah. Talks about that a lot. That is the point. One of the big points of the book of Isaiah is that healing of salvation, healing through
or
salvation.
your favorite book, I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you shall be clean, and I will cleanse you from all your uncleannesses.
Yes. And yes, in my favorite book where he talks about taking the dry bones and breaking them back to life in the spirit, and that is like that which has not been assumed has not been healed. And if God doesn't take in all of those parts of those sicknesses, which is why depression and anxiety and trauma aren't a moral corruption and taint.
No.
That makes us irrevocably broken and unhealable and unlovable.
Yes.
Those are
Yes.
very deep soul wounds,
Yes.
and sometimes those get infected, and sometimes that
Yes.
infection, when you hit those to try to heal that, you get into that purging of like the food poisoning kind of analogy
Mm-hmm.
part of that, and
Mm-hmm.
trying to, but that still means that all of that Christ assumed and healed all of that. So all of that pain and all of
Absolutely.
that trauma and all of that difficulty in trying to sit with the incarnation, joy to the world, and my life is horrible and I'm really depressed and I don't know what to do, because
Yep.
how can God love me when I'm like this? Well,
Yep.
God can love you when you're like that because he sees that you are sick and that
Yep.
you need healing and care. You don't
Yep.
need condemnation and fear of wrath.
Yep.
So,
Yep. Yeah,
so
I mean, we keep talking about, like, Jesus bearing our sins or bearing, our
Mhm,
iniquities or those kind of things, but we forget that that language is priestly language.
mhm,
It is not the sacrifice that dies that bears sins or bears iniquity. That would invalidate it. That would
right.
make it impure. It is the priest who is so holy that he can bear it safely, he can carry it safely, and what he does with it is he removes it. He
Mhm,
either cleanses it and purifies it and neutralizes it with life stuff like blood, or he sends it off onto a different sin bearer and sends it all the way out of the camp into the wilderness.
mhm,
um like that's or and this is not just a death thing. So like
mhm,
Matthew in his gospel, in Matthew 8, he cites Isaiah 50:53, which is the quintessential, he was pierced for our
right.
transgressions chapter. He cites Isaiah 53 saying, um, uh, in the context of the story, Jesus is going around healing the sick. He just got
Mhm,
done healing Peter's mother-in-law, raising the dead, casting out demons, doing making the lame walk, all those things. And then Matthew quotes Isaiah 53 as saying, in this way, while he's living, was the scripture fulfilled. He bore our infirmities and carried our diseases.
mhm,
So, like, that is something that happens in his life, in his incarnation. So, what God with us and joy to the world, the Lord has come means is he's here to carry our diseases, carry our anxieties, cast all your anxieties on him, for he cares for you. Well, he cares for you because he's borne them, because he's carried them. Um, Now, does any of this like make the subjective experience any less? Perhaps not. And again, that's not necessarily a bug, because sometimes we do have to feel
mhm,
that experience to actually walk through, not around the valley of the shadow of death. And I mean, all this matters deeply in terms of theology because, and this is something I was talking to my small group about just this last week. Um, Here's the bottom line question. When Jesus became incarnate, uh, was he trying to solve a us problem, a human problem, or was he trying to solve a God problem?
mhm,
And I mean, I think quite clearly the answer is us. He was trying to heal us, trying to solve a human problem. Now, people might say, well, why not both? Okay, sure, fine. I can acknowledge that, God has a problem with sin and he's trying to solve that
mhm,
problem. Okay, fine. But how does he solve that problem? Purification, healing,
mhm,
cleansing, restoration. So, insofar as there ever is any kind of forensic or legal or penal kind of um, features to that, it is contained within and subsumed by the
mhm,
ontology. So it's like heal the people, heal the person, heal human nature, and that solves the penal forensic legal problem because now the patient is cured. We
mhm,
don't have to punish him for the illness. The illness is gone because it's cured. Versus if we put penal forensic legal stuff first, then that never actually winds up solving the core problem or of human nature. Or if it is seen as solving the core problem, it's only a gift of grace given to a select few who believe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Compared to the Eastern view, which by the way is the same view as First John 2:2
Mm-hmm.
says, he himself was the atoning sacrifice for our sins, and not for ours only, but also for the whole world. So,
Yeah, and I'm wondering, Spencer, as we're sitting here talking about this, because some of us still have family that are in some of those other views of theology, who um, it can be difficult when you're having to do, holiday things and holiday celebrations and talking about Christmas and the miracle of Christmas with people who are looking at Christmas and Advent from a perspective of penal substitutionary atonement. And they are coming at this from, Christ came to stave off the wrath of God. And for some reason, when the church and I grew up in, at the Sunday before Advent was always John Edwards' Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God Sunday. I don't know why. But
what?
it was, yeah, they started Advent with Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. Like, because the incarnation comes to somehow like divert, like,
I mean, I guess
I don't know.
kind of makes some sort of twisted sense of like you got to present the bad news before you drop
Right,
good news, but
right.
come
It
on.
I tell
Okay.
you that that's a special group of fun, that tradition over there. Um, you know, but sitting in, because some of us are, have to go back and sit in some of that theology, and some of us have family who are very damaged from that theology, and we want to, you know it can get really complicated. How do I even send a
Mhm.
Christmas card to somebody
Yep.
when they've got the damage of, how does God even love me, and I send you a Christmas card that says, peace on earth, and I'm in a season of torture and my soul is feeling tortured. Like, it gives, it can be so complicated, and I don't want
Mhm.
to further damage somebody else by, in well-meaning ignorance, sending them the good, a card about the love of God when they're in terror, that, you
Yeah.
know been traumatized by the fact that God is going to strike them as some sort of angry mega Zeus, that, whatever, that doesn't. So I want to, just for a second, to plug, I put a link to the episode that Spencer released this morning on his podcast, and talking about severe mercies, and goes into a lot of this wrath and some of this stuff. So I would go listen to that, because it is tremendous, and it does a really great job of it, of debunking some of the negative sides of this wrath thing. But sometimes, and during Christmas and being with family who has damage or has the theology that is hurtful, and interacting in that and protecting ourselves from being re-injured by some of that stuff. So, Spencer, how do we do that in a way that we are guarded from that?
Yeah. That's why I think it's appropriate to read the Bible with a trauma informed lens. That's why I do my podcast, is because I think people who have been privileged, and I do think that is the correct word there, to not experience trauma,
Mhm.
or at least not to the degree that several people do. So, I mean, in some ways, we all have varying degrees of experience of trauma, but I mean, on the capital T level.
Mhm.
Um, those of us like me who have been privileged in that way, it is incumbent upon us to, the I don't like these terms, but I'm just going to use them because they're biblical. The strong bear the burden of the weak. And I don't mean weak like in that sense. And that's why I don't like that term being used here. But I will say, let's put it this way: the resourceful bearing the burdens of those who lack the resources. The privileged bearing the burdens of the underprivileged, like all of it.
Mhm.
We'll use whatever language is going to resonate with you. But the point here is that it's really important to, in those contexts, to not just go, well, I'm just going to spout off truth. And if they have a problem with it, well, then that is their heart. All I'm doing is I'm just being the messenger, just giving them the gospel. It is really important to not have anything like that attitude. It's important to kind of walk in there and go, yeah, I might be speaking truth, but love does no harm to a neighbor or to a brother. That's Romans 14. That love looks at the people where they are. Again,
Mhm.
this is Romans 14 all over, and says, I may have certain freedoms and gifts and privileges and everything else that you don't have. And
Mhm.
I am, job number one is don't look down on them for that.
Mhm.
It is not about them. And that's why I resisted the weak language. Like, it's not because
Mhm.
they're morally weak. It's not because they are failing in some way. They just can't see the light like you can. Yeah, that way lies complete spiritual uh, car wreck. So don't look down on them, because to their own master, they stand and fall.
Mhm.
And you, to your master, stand and fall too. And this is a passage that has, frankly, in some ways haunted me, but in a good way. Is, those to whom much has been given, much will be required.
Mhm.
That people like me who have been so privileged are responsible to carry that burden, for those who might not be able to. And it's really important that if I take that privilege and I use it in uh, harmful ways, not only have I missed an opportunity, I have misused the
Mhm.
gifts of God. And that is a very dreadful thing. Not because he's wrathful and angry and is going to smite me, but because I have collaborated with the enemy. I have
Mhm.
I have damaged and hurt his children. Like I talked earlier, that's why I was trying to be transparent about my
Mhm.
struggles with my daughter. Is like, I do not like that version of myself. I just don't. But I also realize that, like Paul, not I, but sin that dwells in me is doing
Mhm.
that. And I have to have implacable wrath and hatred and willingness to root out everything that is sin, not because I deserve punishment, but because sin is a parasite.
Mhm.
And sin is the sickness that I have that is killing me and killing everyone I come into contact with if I don't get this under control.
Right. That's like, because that makes me think about, like, why that's so important, and why being very careful to be vigilant in our attention to treating our own sin issues, because that's, is things, is situations like, the summer that I got sick. We
Hmm.
were out on the Oregon coast, and it was a very long, it was a 3 hour road construction delay. So we were down playing in the creek, and then that creek fed down into the camp that got polluted the drinking water there that summer. And
Hmm.
so all of us got whatever that virus was that was in there. And that virus was the thing that kicked off the autoimmune condition
Oh boy.
that now I live with forever. And it's
Yeah.
like, if sin is a sickness, I have to be careful not to give you a virus that's going to kick
Hmm.
off a chronic condition in you.
Right.
So that's, I think, like, that's why I love so much about why I've been living in the Cappadocians and the Desert Fathers at St. Macrina so much lately, because they talk about this push pull thing where I
Hmm.
pull away inside to align and become in alignment with Christ, and to get my internal house, in order, and deal with those issues. And then in the external, I can then give the love and grace that I have learned in the Christ-like pursuit internally, I can share
Right.
in community. So,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
this I have to, but that needs a guide. So, Spencer, if we're not in the Eastern tradition, how do we do that?
Hmm. It has to be in community, one way or the other, and not an echo chamber community. Like, that's one of the beauties of Eastern Orthodoxy and the drawbacks of Protestantism, is that because Protestantism is so focused on, it's every man woman job for themselves in terms of interpretation. There is no kind of North Star guiding light to be able to say this is the best way to read these texts. um, we kind of self-select into echo chambers. We self-select into people who agree with us, people who worship like us, people. So that's why we have like charismatics for the people who are comfortable with that kind of thing, or we have low church or high church for people who want or those kind of things. And so we kind of self-select into those echo chambers. So when I say community, being aware that if you're in an echo chamber community, then you won't see your biases and your blind spots. Now, is that true to some extent in the Eastern Orthodoxy too? Of course, yes. But one of the values of that parish model is you just show up at the nearest place, and whoever is there is whoever is there. And you are, in many ways, not really forced, like against your will, because you're there by your will, but you are compelled, you are encouraged, you are whatever you want to say, to build community with a wide variety of different cultures, different languages in many cases, different people, different ages, all of that stuff. And I'm not at all saying that like this is an on-off switch of all good, all bad, 0 to 100. Like, yeah, no one tries to paint me with too broad of a brush here. So I'll dial my own brush strokes back a little bit. But I do think that it certainly is true that we have to be in a community, and that community has to be diverse, has to have a wide multitude of different voices, different perspectives. And that is the only way that we're going to be able to know the sensitivities of other people. So, especially if it's like, if we're talking about in the context of trauma and trying to be sensitive to that, we have to look at that and say, I haven't experienced that. So job number one is don't stand on the outside and judge people who have. Job number two is give grace and ask them questions so I understand where they're coming from. There's the E in the EAR, empathize. And then if I have a response, it needs to be a response that is with intellectual and cultural humility, and realize that
Mhm.
I just simply don't have the same life experiences. And I see it differently, which can be helpful, because maybe your blind spots as someone who, like, I was having a conversation with somebody who I love dearly about this maybe about a year ago or so, about how they were trying to say that, like, well, you just don't understand what it's like because you haven't been through this traumatic life experience, life state that I have. And I was like, yeah, you're right, I don't. But here's the thing: having gone through that gives you blind spots, and I don't have those.
Mhm.
Just like having not gone through it gives me blind spots, and you don't have those. And so the answer is not like one person, because of their life experience, has the corner mark on truth, either
Mhm.
the privileged or the underprivileged, either one. Neither one has the corner market on truth. Neither one sees, quote unquote, more objectively. We have to bring everybody's subjective experiences, everybody's perspectives together into a uh, without the dividing wall of hostility, because they're
Mhm.
all one. We are all united in Christ, which does not erase Jew or Gentile, which does not erase male or female, which does not erase any of those things. It gives us beautiful diversity within the unity And that's why we have to do it in community, so that we can have that together unity. That's what community means. So,
And I think one of the things too that I would also add to that, say yes, amen, we need community, but I think we also need we need those figures in our lives that are
mhm.
those people who are those mentors, those people who are more spiritually mature than
Yeah.
we are, further down the road than we are, that we have these deeper conversations of the things that we're struggling with in the Eastern Orthodox Church. That's called confession, and that's also
Hmm.
called having a spiritual father or spiritual mother, and another role that your sponsor takes on that you talk through
Hmm.
some of. So you have several layers of this who can point out to you your blind spots that
Right.
maybe a group of people together don't quite get, but you know, you need somebody further down the road than you that can
Hmm.
have that wisdom to say, yeah, well, that's true, but what you're missing is this. And
Right.
and as I've been, again, like I'm just obsessed with the Cappadocians at the moment, and they're one of they're such good. Once you learn how to
They
read
really
them,
are.
you
Yes.
have to learn
And
how to read them first. But
including Saint Macrina. She
yes,
often gets left off of the Cappadocian list, but
she's
I
the
am
fourth
absolutely going to.
Cappadocian.
Yes, she is. Yes. Anyway.
Yes, I have something that I'm working on. I'll tell you
Yeah.
about when we're
Yeah.
done about Saint Macrina, because oh my goodness,
Ooh.
she's my patron saint,
Yeah.
and I have learned a
I know
lot
you
in
haven't
this whole
forgotten. I just want
process.
to make sure everyone else hasn't forget
Right,
doesn't forget about her.
but they all talk about that. It is really important that you get down, when you get down to the root of all of it, the root sickness at the bottom of all of the passion, at the root of all of the passions is self-love. And learning how to see that in yourself is
Mm.
so very difficult. And so you
Hmm.
need somebody that can go, Spencer, that was
Hmm.
not very loving when you did this, like, but has the
Yeah.
way to be able to show you that in a loving way, to help, because sometimes, you know, as like as I've been learning more about the passions and how that looks, and in the spiritual formation class that I'm in right now, that I struggle a lot with, that I'm starting to, as I'm thinking through the stuff that they're talking about and the shortcomings they're trying to address, and why isn't this Protestant church thing working, and how do we fix it? And I'm looking at the stuff that they're talking about, and I'm like, as you boil that down, and you boil it down, and you boil it down, it's all different versions of greed, and of anger, and of the things that are the passions, that all boil down to self-love, which is what got Adam and Eve in the first place. And it's just like, how many ways, evil doesn't create, but it is very good at being a chameleon.
Yep.
And so it can take that self-love and package it in a way that we don't see it at all, which is why
Yeah.
we need somebody in our community, and someone that we are putting ourselves as a mentor role
Hmm.
for us, to be able to point out, this is where you missed it.
Yep.
Like, this is where this is getting your goat, and you need to, kind of go back
Hmm.
and look at
Well,
that.
and the insidiousness of that self-love
Mhm.
problem is, which by the way is love of the false self.
Right.
Let's just
Rather
be
than the
clear
false
about
self.
that.
Right.
But anyway,
Right.
um, the insidiousness of that is that, and this is something I see happen all the time, where if we really have that problem, then someone comes to us and says, "Hey, look, I love you, but that problem's there." And we go, "Oh, no, it isn't." Well, you're just saying that because you're a hater. You're just saying that because you have your own problems. Or, you know what? I appreciate your wisdom, but I just see it differently. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, again, it's the Dunning-Kruger effect. You just
Mm-hmm.
don't know what you don't know. And so it kind of defeats the purpose of having
Right.
a mentor or a spiritual father or spiritual mother or whatever, when you go, okay, this is the person who I'm going to look up to and ask advice of, but I'm never going to submit to them.
Mm-hmm.
It really defeats the purpose. Like, the whole point of it is not to tell you things you already know.
Right.
the point of it, I mean, sometimes that is the point, but that's not the point. Or sometimes that is a helpful way to do it. The whole point of it is to help you see things that you can't see
Mm-hmm.
yet.
Right.
And sometimes the only way you can see them is to actually walk the path.
Mm-hmm.
And that ultimately is kind of the answer to the big question we've been wrestling with this whole time, is like, how do we see the goodness of God
Right.
when when our life doesn't feel like it reflects that? Again, going back to the analogy with people who are in a marriage and trust is broken.
Mm-hmm.
I see this where people will say, okay, I don't know if I can trust this person. So, because the trust has been broken. And so then they go through a whole bunch of protective, defensive mechanisms. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to hold them at arm's length. I'm going to deny them affection and connection. And I'm going to doubt and question everything because I can't trust them. Well, that becomes a feedback loop of
Mm-hmm.
untrust. Now, am I criticizing or condemning people for that? Absolutely not, in no way whatsoever. It is a perfectly rational, reasonable survival response in that context to react without
Mm-hmm.
trust, because trust has actually been broken. But the problem is that trust will never be rebuilt unless trust is given again.
Mm-hmm.
And how we do that is the hardest thing in the world. It has to be, I always tell people, like, do the smallest step you can with with whatever you have for as long as you can, as safely as you can. Like, take that first
Mm-hmm.
small step that feels safe, does not feel uncomfortable, or sorry, does not feel comfortable,
Right.
but feels like it carries some sense of safety. Even if I don't feel safe in taking this step, at least I know if the ground falls underneath me, I have the parachute, something like that. Where I'm taking a risk. We have to risk in order
Mm-hmm.
to build trust back. And so if we don't feel like we can trust God, we have to risk it.
Right. Just where we started with the question of how do I read the love of God if I don't trust God? If my trustability is broken
Mm-hmm.
and God says, "Trust me, I'm going to fix all of it."
Mm-hmm.
Uh no thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Oh,
and I have,
yeah.
okay, so do you have time for one more question and then we'll
Oh,
wrap up? Because I
yeah.
forgot to
Absolutely, I
ask
do.
you like how long you I forgot to ask you how long you
Oh,
had to
sure. Yeah,
go.
like 2 hours
Well,
total would be fine. So yeah, I
yeah,
probably got
because
another 15 minutes.
okay, yeah.
So
Usually with
yeah,
me, it's
sure.
a 2 hour, but it's a 2 hour
Okay.
at least. It make me
Okay.
buckle up for a couple of hours.
Yeah.
So, because I was just thinking about this thing and this trust. I have to go back and find that thought because it kind of got derailed for a second. Um,
How do I trust God when I don't feel like I can, when I feel like he's broken that trust?
right. Oh boy,
How
I
do I
hate it
read the
when
Bible in a way that is about trust?
give me a second.
Okay,
It'll come back to me in a second.
sure.
I get derailed. Sometimes my ADHD, when the trail goes off the rail, it goes off the canyon, and it can be hard to find it again because it was on a track over a canyon, and it just is gone down the hole there because this is just, oh, doggone it, that was a good one too. Anyway, so yes, so how if I'm sitting there trying to reestablish trust with God, because that's what
Hmm.
we were talking about there, and doggone it, it just went too far down a deep canyon and it's just gone. It's just gone. I doggone it. I hate that because that was
I'm
a good
seeing
one
a
too.
little Wiley
Like,
Coyote, outline in in my mind.
it's
You
the
know,
little spinning thing of the,
yeah,
like buffering wheel there
yeah.
because it just that's really funny. It doesn't happen very often in the middle of a live stream, but it does happen sometimes. It just my ADHD gets the better of me sometimes. I don't know.
We
Um,
are all fearfully and wonderfully made.
You know what? I think that's it. So, um,
Oh.
right. So, like, if you're sitting there, we're thinking about that and trying to read how in how do I read that God loves me,
Mm,
and if that is something like see, it's just gone off the track is broke there. It's just the track is just broken and gone. If a tree falls in the wood, yes, that's
yeah.
exactly where we are. If we so I guess I will probably have to message you that fantastic question later
Okay.
when it comes back to me at 4 o'clock in the morning because I'm
Okay.
just gonna be like, doggone it, because that was a good one too. Because I'm just, I don't so I wanna like as we're going into this season and it is gratitude and it is hope and it is light and it is love. How do we interact with that and with others around us in gentleness and kindness
Mm,
as we're moving forward to not
hmm.
re-traumatize ourselves, not re-traumatize them? How do we live out that reestablishing and helping people reestablishing trust?
Yes. Well, here I'm going to go to one of my expertise episodes that I did in my podcast last season with Dr. Timothy Petitsis.
Hmm.
He has written a book called The Ethics of Beauty, and the title of that episode was Beauty First, Healing from Trauma. And I think that is really how we go about it. Yes, we are going into a season full of beauty. I mean, I know some people are Grinches, and there's a part of me that certainly feels a little Grinchy sometimes, especially in this godforsaken space between now and the day after Thanksgiving,
Hmm.
because it is still Thanksgiving time, people. It is way too early for Christmas. It is not Christmas time. Put it away. Day
I think
after Thanksgiving and no earlier.
I think
So,
you and I had this debate last year, actually.
yes, yes, we did. Yes, we did. Yes. For two people who get along well and have a lot in common that we agree with, we also disagree on a lot. Yeah.
It's Advent. My tree is up.
Yes.
Deal with it.
Yes. Lord have mercy on Ambrose. Just kidding. Just kidding. Just kidding. Anyway. Anyway.
We're good
So
until we get
yes.
to the fact that you're wrong about Leviticus and I'm right about Ezekiel. But other than that,
Yeah. Yeah. So we're getting into the season of all of beauty, of all these beautiful things of, and I think where it starts is not about like top down intellectual knowledge. It's not propositional content. I tell my clients all the time, like, if knowledge were healing, then Google or now Chat GPT would put me out of a job.
yeah.
I mean, like we can get the answer. We can know what the answer is by and large. But we have to actually do it. And we have to not just do it, but like see the beauty in it. Because it's one thing to kind of walk the path because, all right, fine, is what I should do. Or I guess there's hell on the other side. So I'll go down this path. Sure, whatever. I'll just trudge along. But then when you see the beauty of the path, that's when things change and shift. And so I think a lot of times we try to make that something that kind of comes later. And I'm not going to say that it's false or untrue. Like, I mean, in many ways, you can't see the beauty until you have the eyes to see the beauty. So
Hmm.
there's that. But maybe if we try to have the eyes, like look at what other people find beautiful in this season and say, what am I missing? Kind of like what we were talking about earlier of like blind spots and largely built by experience. A lot of people find beauty in this whole idea of God becoming human and being a baby, like, to me, I just don't see it. I don't see why this is such a big deal. Well, what beauty is there? Why do people find beauty in it? And that's again why
Mhm.
theology matters, because I find this picture of Christ purifying humanity at every second of his life to be so beautiful, so much more beautiful. And it activates a lot more passion. And that's why I've been, so spicy and passionate in this stream, is because I see so much more beauty in this picture than in a, purely forensic and transactional, magical lever, if I do the right thing, God will reward me kind of picture. Um, there's just so much more real life beauty in living with and loving my wife as an unpredictable and also a beautiful person, rather than as a set of propositions that if I just figure it out, then I can input something into the spreadsheet and output something on the other side. That's true in marriages. It's also true in our relationship to God. So, in terms of how do we navigate through this season, just try to open your eyes to beauty. See that as much as possible. Look for it actively. I usually call this like looking for God glimmers with my clients. Trying to see little glimmers of the love of God, the beauty of God, just little sparks here and there. And that is not going to satisfy you right now
Mhm.
if you've been hurt and traumatized and been through the ringer this year. It won't satisfy that little glimmer, but it will give you a hunger for more, and then you will look for more. And actually, that's one of the biggest things I would say as a takeaway,
Mhm.
is that I talk with my clients all the time about how emotions are information. They tell us what we care most about, what we feel like is missing in our life, or we need more of in our life, or those kind of things. So when we encounter that hurt and abandonment and loss and fear and rage and all those uncomfortable emotions connected to the feeling of God being absent or silent or any of those things, that is actually, I want to be careful, but um, we can see that as information, as telling us actually we only feel the loss of what we desire. I mean, grief only is what it is because we love the person we lost so much. And um, that's that's also a gift from God. The time we have with them is a gift, and the grief we have is because we love them so much and wish we would have more time with them and all those things. So it's like there's two sides to the coin. So when we feel like God is absent, the other side to that coin is God is love and God is goodness. And when we look for him, we start to see the other side of that coin, not to erase the unpleasant
Mhm.
emotions, not to get rid of them or bypass them, but just to realize that there is the reason why we feel the way we do is because we long for God, because our souls need that, like water. And so that's why um, I would say that, like, a person who is in full on deconstruction because they're just ticked off at God because they feel like he's abandoned them and left them alone. I feel like that person is actually closer to the heart of God than a person who thinks, I don't need him. I'm good. I'm okay. Or, because the opposite of love is not hate, it's actually
Mhm.
indifference. So, long winded answer just to say how to get through this season: find beauty, even in the absence of beauty, because missing it tells you you long for it.
Mhm. And maybe I would add a follow-up question to that of being sensitive to sitting with people in those feelings at this point. When you
Yes.
know that they're struggling with it, not
Yes.
not jumping to the assumption of the happy, and to
Yes.
maybe sit with people a little bit That's one of the things that I love and appreciate, and you see this in the story of the of Lazarus, and you see, Mary and Martha are sitting shiva, and this,
Hmm.
this tradition, and in the Jewish culture of sitting shiva, where you just, and the beautiful thing about this, and it comes from the book of Job originally, and the things that Job's friends did well was they sat and said nothing
Yep.
and just sat with him, and to just sit with people. And sometimes the best thing we can say is nothing and
Hmm.
just be there. Because most often than, I don't know about anybody else, but I usually get into trouble when I start talking, not when I'm not talking. It's when I get in trouble. So,
Yeah.
acknowledging and not invalidating the fact that this is a hard time for some people, and that the love of
Yep.
God can be hard for people.
Yep.
And to just maybe say, well, tell me about that. And then just shut your mouth and listen.
Yep. Yep.
And
There's the empathize,
mhm,
accept, and then respond. Yes. Just empathize with them and say, that sucks. And just
mhm,
accept their reality as their reality from the life they've lived, which is different than yours and has different blind spots than you do. And stop and don't try to tell them that they should be at the same point on the road that you are. Just be with them. And honestly, that, oddly enough, is the thing. Doing that, empathizing and accepting and being with and joining someone, helping them feel heard and seen, that is the
mhm.
most effective way to yourself be heard and seen. If you have something you want to say, listen first. Like that is
Right.
absolutely the best way to do that.
Because most people when they're in that space, don't want a theology lesson. They want to
No.
be Hagar and be seen.
Yep. Yep.
And sometimes just sitting there and letting them feel seen and heard
Mhm. Helps
is
them to not
the
feel like a
really, I
stranger.
mean, yeah, just
Mhm.
sitting there and letting them. And that sometimes is the hardest thing, because you start hearing people talking about their pain and you're like, I know where your theology is wrong, so I want to like, and just mm-mm.
Oh, I feel that. I
Nope.
have that experience every single day as a counselor. Yes.
Yeah, it's when they start to ask those questions that it's time to have some very gentle conversations about that. But I am not the great physician.
Right.
I can't fix it. I can't heal it. I can listen and point you to the one who can.
Hmm. Yep.
And I can pray for you a lot.
Hmm.
And that's one of those things, I think one of the things I've learned about the power of the Jesus prayer is when I'm listening to somebody, and just over and over, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, because he can have mercy in the ways that they need that I don't know. So,
Hmm.
well, Spencer, it is 2 hours. It's been a joy as always.
Turning
You
into
and
a
I,
pumpkin.
well, we dive into some pretty, interesting and difficult things around here
Hmm.
sometimes, and it's always enjoyable when you're around and we get
Thank you.
into some of these difficult things, because I always learn a lot. I know that the several people who end up coming by and leaving comments or whatnot end up learning a lot. So, what is your takeaway you want people to know, and two, what's coming up and where can people find you?
Um, the takeaway is come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Um, that's Jesus's words, and that's what he tells us. That's what he tells all of us. Um, for whatever the weariness and heaviness is that he is the place where rest is to be found. I kind of bashed Augustine a little bit earlier, but I'm going to redeem him a bit. And I love that quote from him where it says that we are made for you, and our souls are restless until they find their rest in you. And I think that's really what it comes down to for me. So it's kind of a final word, but as far as what we have going on, I'm getting ready to do a Sabbath week here, either this week or next week for the podcast, but got a couple of different expertise episodes, one of which already has been recorded. I'm just waiting to release it. We're going to start diving into Sinai next in the podcast, because we just got through the Sea of Reeds, and now we're on our way to Sinai. And once we get there, then we'll dive into the best book of the Bible. So
Ezekiel, yes, that's awesome. It's I can't help it. I just love that. It's fun. And Ezekiel there's a lot of good stuff in there. And one of these days, I'm going to figure out how to hijack your channel on a weekly sabbatical and definitive lay out why Ezekiel is better.
Oh boy! All righty.
That would be amazing.
Well, whenever we have that Lincoln Douglas debate, I'll put it up here live. So.
That's fun. Yeah. So I've got a couple things coming out. We're going to be, most of it is going to be at the new year. Thursday, I am supposed to be showing up on the church split. We'll see. Wes is a little unpredictable sometimes, so that still might be rescheduled. And then we are working on, we haven't nailed a date down yet, but we are resurrecting the next episode of Why Leviticus Matters, which is going to be awesome, because we're going to talk about the Eucharist and why that matters and all of that good stuff.
Excellent.
So that's going to be fun. And then we've got another episode, and it's going to be fun because Dr. Leighton Flowers is going to be joining us for one of these How to Read the Bible episodes. We're going to talk about some of this terrible Reformed theology that messes so many people up. So we're going to get right into that. And then I've got a few other things that eventually, as I get time, I might put out some surprise stuff while I'm on winter break, or I might just be in a coma for those 5 weeks, because I've still got a chapter. I have a chapter to write, and another 2 in a chapter to finish editing. And then the chapter I'm still writing to finish editing and turn in by the 8th of December. So I'm like, writing mode, but it's good stuff. So it's going to be fun. So thank you everybody for coming by and for sticking with us through this. And I know that I love these conversations, and we will have who knows how many episodes in this series, because it's just kind of like when stuff comes up, I'm like, hey, Spencer, let's come talk about this.
Sure.
And he's always
happy
game to come to have these conversations. So yes. And so my takeaway is always remember that we need to show the mercy we are given to others. And that every day we long and journey to dwell deeper with God every single day. And that's what we do. So everyone have a blessed Thanksgiving, have a blessed Christmas and holiday. And for those of us who are doing Advent now, enjoy the Advent fast. And we are going to be, and I'm learning to love what comes out of fasting. So that's kind of fun too. But anyway, so go out, be blessed, and I will see you the next time I see you.